On today's episode, we're diving into ICP, your ideal client profile, the target audience your agency is designed to serve. We're going to break down the 5 dimensions of real ICP and why most agencies stop way too early in defining theirs.
All right, Steve. So let's first, talk a little bit about why ICP matters. I mean, you hear a lot when people talk about, some positioning exercises you're doing or any kind of like brand strategy work. It's always like, hey, who's your target audience? Who's your ICP? But, in the case of agencies, why do ICPs really matter?
I think if you think about a well-defined ICP for an agency, there's a lot of kind of downstream effects of that. So one is, your sales cycle should shorten because you have a very specific target that you're going after. The delivery from your team improves. And then ultimately, the margins of the agency should improve.
Yeah. And I guess like to kind of talk about in terms of like, the negatives first, because if you think about like every bad client you've ever had, and if you're as an agency leader, if you're honest with yourself, these are all clients that, you took through your sales process. It's not like somebody snuck in and suddenly became a client overnight, right? The agency leader made deliberate choices to bring on a client. And typically, this happened because the client had money to spend, and they were like, hey, I need something done. Hey, I need some marketing help. I need some brand help. I need some, digital web help. And so, that felt good enough. And so as a result, the agency took on this client that ended up not being a good fit. And so back to your point, well-defined ICP is all about helping you in some ways avoid these poor fit clients who kind of, might show up with money, but, at the end of the day, they are a bad fit.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. Without an ICP, you're just taking on anyone who will pay you, right? Like anyone who has money who will come through the door, without a clear rationale or clear positioning on why you should be taking on that client or not.
Yeah. The other side of the coin is like, if you have a really well-defined ICP, it's going to help you sharpen your go-to-market, right? And also how you think about messaging, the marketing campaigns, as well as your sales process. So it's all about, that additional step towards differentiation and being, a bit more competitively advantaged versus the others in the market. And yeah, maybe you could speak to a little bit of like, remember the concept of engagement yield that we talked about in episode 25?
Yeah, in that episode, we talked about this concept where if you have a client that is really kind of well fit within your portfolio, it generates more proof points that you can use to land more business. There could be referrals from that specific client and that ICP and a similar ICP. And then there's a lot of leverage that you can develop through processes and all the learning that your team has developed from working with that very specific ICP versus, if there's a client that doesn't fit that, you have the concept of like negative yield where like it actually hurts you on all those points by taking on that client.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to kind of do this deep dive on ICP today because it's also a very important part of what we, Cross Barrel Holdings call the agency growth engine. And this is, basically our kind of go-to-market model, business development model. And underlying this growth engine is what we call the foundation. And, the foundation really has 4 components. It's positioning, it's the ecosystem, which we did an earlier episode on, ICP, and services offering, which we did another episode on as well. And so it's those 4 interconnected components. And really the ICP is informed by the ecosystem that you belong to, as well as like the service offering, which is about serving your ICP. And so, once you kind of start seeing all these pieces working together, it kind of really forms this bedrock from which you can do a lot more effective business development. So that's just a little context on why we think this topic is worth diving into. And, if you go to agencyhabits.com, we'll continue to have more content around the agency growth engine as well as this foundation concept. So let's dive in.
All right. Sounds good. So we have 5 dimensions of the ICP I want to go through today. The first being firmographics. So thinking about who the business is structurally. And there are a few different characteristics you can use to define that. It could be things like, what is the industry or vertical it's in? What is their kind of revenue size or funding stage of the business? How big are they? How many employees do they have? Geographically, where are they located? Um, what is their specific business model? So, is it B2B, B2C? Is it a SaaS business, subscription, e-com, et cetera? And is there any kind of platform or tech stack that it's focused in?
Yeah, and based on what your agency does, some of these things might be more relevant than others. For example, like if you're doing mainly on the brand creative side, maybe the platform or the tech stack is less relevant. But I think what we're trying to do here with going into these characteristics is to just really encourage agencies to go a bit deeper than the surface level of, I think, high level industry and revenue, because we don't think that's enough, right? We often hear, hey, who do what is your ICP? And they go, oh, we work with B2B SaaS companies, and that's where it kind of stops basically. But I think if you kind of go a level deeper, something a bit more useful might be like, hey, we actually work with a series A to B SaaS. They might be running on HubSpot specifically, and now they've kind of outgrown their first marketing hire, and so that's our ICP. That's a bit more useful, and I think it's basically encouraging folks to use these characteristics to better define the firmographics of their ICP.
Yeah. And I think, within that description, like even words like, oh, we work in tech, that is like a broad categorization. There's like cybersecurity businesses, there's like dev tools, like consumer tech businesses, and like they're all very, very different from like how they operate and who they target and how you can service them. So it's like even like how deep can you get with, your definition that can help really narrow down that ICP.
Yeah. And, just to that point, I think it's also a reflection of how expert you are by being able to, really define and kind of identify some of those sub niche categories. So, you think about, if it's, if you go, hey, we work with CPG, right? Which we've often talked about for one of our agencies, Barrel. But it's like, all right, within that, there's food and bev, but within that, it's really like, shelf stable products or something like that. And you can go even deeper because like, even along food and bev dimensions, there's a lot of different categories. And the more you realize it's like, all right, like, are you a distributor? Are you like, a food service business, or are you, what are you exactly? And it's like, there's so much stuff that you can kind of go into. And this goes back to ecosystem and like, it's going to inform where you got to show up.
Awesome. Cool. So let's go into the next dimension, which is the buying trigger. So when is that ICP the target? When are they ready to make a decision? So typically, we might see this in some industries as like, all right, there's a big funding round. So that's a trigger for them to engage in an agency like yours. Maybe they launch a new product line. Maybe there's a new like CMO or a new like executive at the company that joined, or they're going to do an expansion to a new region, or they're going to do a platform migration, or there's some kind of trigger in their business that's causing them to look outwards for an agency to support them.
Yeah. And to that point, like, it's like, I think agencies have to understand like 99% of prospects probably are probably not in market at any given time, right? This is why, this blanket cold outbound a lot of time, gets low signal because most of the time people aren't in market to buy these services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, well, for all these triggers, right? It's like, what are the things that can help you, inform you when these things are happening? Right. So, one easy thing like LinkedIn, you can see when like a job, someone is moving from a job to a job, or like they have a job post up, or like there's some kind of trigger that you could see externally, or, public funding announcements, or basically like for your business, your target, what are the things that are out there that you could lean on and really lean to land that client?
Yeah. And that nowadays with some of these tools, automation tools out there, and you can get, you can get data piped in to, your kind of outbound lists, for example. And so you can get kind of like, hey, this kind of CMO changed their job. That data can actually be used to enrich your list, or like, hey,
Yeah.
we're following like a Crunchbase or some kind of funding, funding news source, and then piping that in. And so there's a lot of ways that these triggers can be very much a part of your, kind of go to market.
Yeah, and I think that the timing is everything there. And there are few. We actually talked about this in episode 18, where we talked about the relationship and referral systems. So even if you think about, it could be your past clients, it could be people that refer you business that are connected to um, these companies. Like, what can you use these triggers to then re-engage them? And like, all right, that's your in. You saw something, so you can reach out and. That someone who said no, like, you could have talked to someone like 6 months ago, and suddenly, like, there's this new thing that happened in their business that like makes it the right time, could change everything.
Exactly. All right. Cool. Let's move on to the third dimension, which we call success definition. So this is all about what is the client trying to achieve, and a lot of I think agencies fall into this trap of being what we call agency oriented. So they're all about, hey, we do awesome work. We have great process. It's about us, right? And instead of being client oriented. So this is more about, hey, what's the client trying to achieve? What does success mean for them? Where are they trying to go? And so I think this is all about flipping that orientation from agency to client, and then being able to put yourself in the shoes of the client and really think about what is it that moves the needle for them.
Yeah, and I think this is another one where the buying trigger could actually be a hint at what their what they see as success. But I think ultimately it's really understanding for them, having a conversation, understanding what is the business outcome that they're hoping to achieve. Is it growing sales? Is it reducing costs? Is it expanding and going, we need to launch in this new region in the next quarter, like, is there a time constraint to it? So it's really everyone has a different reason why they need help. And this it's really important for you to figure that out early on in the process.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to some of the success criteria we might have or definitions we've come across, sometimes it's also imposed on a client by let's say an intermediary, like for example a private equity firm has
Yeah.
acquired a company, and and that company happens to be your client. Now the private equity firm has like these growth goals, for example, and they're under kind of this banner of value creation. They want to make sure that the business is hitting certain kind of goals, and so that's a really clear success definition that the client's going to be aligned to, and then that's our cue to really understand that and be able to speak to that.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in multiple cases, and it could be a cost, reduction or opportunity there to create some value in the business as well, from someone like a private equity firm. So I think that's an important part to distinguish. Um, yeah, another one that you kind of think about is for the stakeholder, the person who's actually engaging you, maybe like they just need to like show progress in their role, and their goal is to like make themselves look good to their boss. And it's like, how do you make them personally look good? And there could be obviously their business goals attached to that, but it's like a personal goal for them to achieve this process. And it may not be tied to specific like number, like I need to hit this revenue goal or something like that.
Yeah, and honestly, I remember like we were working with a large tech client, and our stakeholder was very clear and like, hey, these are my OKRs for the quarter that I need to hit, and it actually didn't have much to do with like the overall business goals, but there were some internal metrics that had been predefined between this client and the client's manager, and so it was about like, how do you use the agency to help achieve those OKRs? And so, you're going to come across situations like that. And it actually is smart to dig into that and understand, okay, like what is the success definition here?
Awesome. Cool. All right. So the next dimension of the ICP is the buying committee. So understanding who's making the decisions at the company. So there are a few different layers here. So you can think about, who's like the economic buyer. So who actually is like, signing the check and owning the budget for it. Who's the person who, it could be the person you're talking to in the sales process, who's a champion, who really is pushing for, the agency to be brought on and is feeling the pain in their day to day. There could be, other people from the team. So like if you're doing something technical, there could be like a technical owner or like a CTO or someone who, could be like really pushing to like make sure like you're up to their standards of whatever it is that you're doing. So I think it's really just understanding like what is the ecosystem of the company and how they make this decision.
And really, like an ICP does, you really have to kind of define who this buyer is, because so much of that is going to determine, how you message them, and even the ecosystem, like where do these specific buyers and the people that are making these decisions actually hang out, and, who do they affiliate with and all those things. So that's why, like, I think it's so important to spend a lot of time here in understanding this. And the bigger piece of this is like, to know that, hey, oftentimes there's going to be, a difference between who you're interfacing with during the sales process and who actually gives the green light. And so in many instances, your job is to actually equip this person. And oftentimes it's going to be the champion with the messaging and the materials to sell it internally, and get the ultimate decision maker, maybe the economic buyer, to sign off on it. And this is something, we've heard it many times. We have a sales coach, Luke Maloney, who works with our agencies, and he's brought this up many times of like, hey, you gotta do a great job of making sure your champion has all that person needs to convince the others within the organization.
If you're lucky, you can actually get in front of the decision maker and be, vouch for yourself and present yourself versus having an intermediary. But, it depends on the company, right? Like the reality is like, at a certain level or however a company is structured, that may not be the case. And they will always want that intermediary that you have to go through. And then, it could also be where, depending on the size of the company, you have like an early stage company where like founder is like involved very heavily day to day. Like they could be the decision maker. Like you're working directly with the CEO and the founder of the business, and like that is your process. But depending on all of the factors, like it could be a very different buying committee that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I want to note like the kind of anti-pattern I've seen with agencies where like they're totally blind to this. So they'll just talk to anybody that shows interest, right? So somebody reaches out. It could be like an intern or like an admin or somebody that like is like, basically just putting together a bunch of proposals. And, you know, that conversation might feel good. And, maybe this person you're interfacing with is like, is really like impressed or, seems impressed and all that stuff. And so you're getting all these positive signals and feeling good about, hey, like I think we got a chance here or whatever.
Yeah.
And by not digging enough into what that actual buying committee is like, you only realize much later, like, oh my God, like you haven't even, like made it to the actual decision makers who are actually going to, care. And the information that's conveyed to them is basically a few bullet points or something like that. And, at that point, it's all apples to apples, and, they're kind of shopping it on dimensions that, make you just, one of many, in a very commoditized way. And so, like, this is what we want agencies to avoid, is like, finding themselves in that situation.
Yeah, I think one situation we've run into is where marketing for a web project, marketing might own the budget, they might be driving the project, but hey, actually, what you didn't realize is the CTO of the business is the one making the decision, and it's their voice that's the loudest, and that will influence all of that. So it's not their budget, right, from a CTO perspective, but it's if you miss that signal throughout the whole journey, you just ignore all the questions, conversations, like ignore. That side of the equation, you could just be blind to how the decisions are being made there.
Yeah. And if you haven't satisfied that CTO, then yeah, you realize, hey, we've gone another direction, and you try to dig into why, and it's like, hey, like you didn't make us comfortable with some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the fifth dimension is Yeah, thinking about the disqualifiers. So things that are beyond the the who the company is and the stakeholders, et cetera. But what are some common things that you should use to disqualify prospects? So things like if there's no clear owner, so if it just feels like it's being bounced around and like a decision is not going to be made. If there's no urgency, they're just shopping around. There's no like moment or trigger that we talked about that is forcing them to make a decision. If they don't have a budget, defined, or they're not sure who's going to pay for it internally. If they have like a misalignment on how they work with you, if you have a process and they disagree with the process, and you have some core misalignments on that perspective, or if the client. You talk to them and you learn that they've been through like 5 agencies in the past year. Like that there's like a track record of challenges working with the company. Yeah, those are some examples that I would say are disqualifiers.
Yeah, and part of this is, we spent the first four dimensions really defining like who we want to go after, and what kind of characteristics that entails. But this is really the inversion exercise, because sometimes you can learn a lot. This is the classic Charlie Munger invert, always invert approach of like, why don't we go deep into who we don't won't work with, and in some ways these are what you call the non-negotiables during your sales process, the things that disqualify potential prospects, even if they come with a load of money, right? And so I think a big one is obviously value, like value alignment. And so these might be products you don't believe in, or you just have a bad feeling about maybe the integrity of the business that kind of is in front of you, wanting to work with you. And so like, what are those signals? Maybe it's certain types of kind of industries or affiliations that you just don't want any part of, and that's okay. Like, you can always say no, and that's part of being a private business, is you have that right. And so yeah, it's about those things, and really it's about going beyond the understanding that, look, like, we all need to generate revenue, but at the end of the day we also know that having this kind of discipline is gonna be beneficial. So just putting that down on paper.
Yeah, I would say a helpful exercise for this is you probably have some clients from the past that you've learned some lessons on of like, oh man, we really shouldn't have taken on that client because of XYZ reason. Like there are signs and like, I think it's going through and like writing it out and having like for each disqualifier, having like a vivid, like, all right, this is that client that this disqualifier is from. And, seeing if that aligns with your future state of, all right, we want to work with these kind of clients, but if we see these flags, it's a warning sign for us, and it may not be a hard disqualifier, but definitely worth discussing.
Yeah, and so here's a very important nuance to all of this, because I think we encourage folks to kind of make this list and act on it, but it doesn't mean you are kind of like rude or unhelpful to folks, because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, like, every prospect that kind of reaches out and is interested in working with you, um, they're a potential client, maybe not now, but potentially later, and they might move from let's say they are working for a company whose products you have an issue with for whatever reason, but remember, it's a human being on the other side, and that person could go on to work somewhere else that might be more aligned with a client that a product or kind of service that you want to work with. And so you can still take the call, you can be helpful, but you can be very clear on like, hey, actually it's our policy not to work with whatever, but hey, here's some other folks that I can introduce you to, or hey, here's some thoughts that we have on this, but just so we're unable to take on the project at this time, whatever it is. Make them feel good, because it's just another investment in potentially a relationship that could blossom down the line.
yeah,
Awesome. Okay, just to wrap it up, some practical next steps for our listeners here. This is an exercise that we've done across our agencies as well. Like, for just take your last 10 clients that you've signed, and just think about like what do the best ones have in common across these 5 dimensions, right? And when you kind of take a look at across all those things, that's likely your real ICP. There's probably like a pattern that emerges. And then definitely write this down, share it with the team, have a discussion around it, and then ask yourself like, is this the ICP you want to keep, or do you think it needs to be evolved? And if you want to keep it, maybe there's ways to go even deeper and get more specific. If you need to evolve it, maybe you have to rethink some of the things that you're doing. Maybe the ecosystem you belong to or the service offering as well. And just keep in mind, the ICP doesn't shrink your market, right? It's all about focusing your energy so you're able to increase the quality of deal flow, better margins, just better go to market, all those things. So yeah, with that, just a plug, if you want to kind of test out what the ICP looks like on your site, check out our tool at foundation.agencyhabits.com. In 60 seconds, it'll give you a snapshot of what it kind of detects as your ICP and suggests what it could be. And so please give that a try. But till next time, thanks for joining. Take care.
Thanks.